What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Quarters Podcast. In this episode, we're diving headfirst into one of our favorite segments, This or That. We did offense last time. This time, we are doing defensive prospects from the 2025 class, the edge, defensive tackles, cornerbacks, and safeties. So we're going to be diving into that. Who's worth the hype? How do we compare Abdul Carter to Micah Parsons? What are we doing there? It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of debate. So hang in after the intro. All right, let's jump into it. Starting off, we're not helmet scouting here, folks. We promised not to do that, but this one we kind of had to. Abdul Carter versus Micah Parsons here. When you look at Abdul Carter this year, 6'3", 252 is 2024 stats. Defensive grade 90.8. When you're looking at his pass rush productivity, 11.3. His win percentage is at there, 22.9. He actually kind of beats Parsons there. At sacks, he has 12 this year. He beats Parsons there. And pressures, he has 58 pressures. So he's all over the field. I don't know if you even also saw him out there on social media. He was in the hot tub scouting his next opponent this last week. So, hey, that gives me a plus on that side as well. For Parsons, when he came out in 2019, when you look at that, 26 pressures, 5 sacks. Look at pass rush productivity was 17.8, 91.6 defensive grade. So he beats them there on those two parts there. When you think of these guys in a whole, how do you compare these guys, Christian?
Well, first I want to mention Randy really wanted to do Dallas Turner, but I just I made the graphics so that we're going with Micah Parsons. No, and the reason I think that we go with Micah Parsons here is because these two players had a similar trajectory, right? Micah Parsons mostly played linebacker in college. Abdul Carter up into this year was only playing linebacker in college, and these guys are freak athletes. And so when you watch them play, it's tough not to see what Micah Parsons has become at the NFL level in Abdul Carter, because Abdul Carter has now a little bit of a head start. Micah Parsons did have some defensive end snaps on that Penn State film, but it really was him playing linebacker. And I think when he was taken with the 12th pick in the NFL draft, we just talked pre-show, Kevin, there was a kind of a sense of why are we taking this kid? You transition him to edge rusher and you see what he can be. We've already seen that from Abdul. And so I feel a lot more comfortable projecting Abdul Carter to the next level. His growth, even from week 1 to the college football playoff, has been just something I don't think I've seen a player get that much better that quickly. He's developed pass rush moves as the season has gone on. He's displayed all the bend that we want to see in edge rushers. So to me, this is like a clear, if I evaluated Micah Parsons back then as strictly an edge rusher, I probably would have had something similar to Abdul Carter, but because that's what we have with Abdul Carter, I think I'll be higher on him than I was Micah Parsons back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, Micah Parsons, walk so Abdul Carter could run. They learned from what they did with him. They allowed him to transition a lot quicker. And that's why, even like you said, if you were just scouting Micah as a pure edge rusher going into that draft, we would have kind of seen it was a bit better than Abdul Carter's tape last year, I'd say. But you see all the hard work and dedication in the offseason to go from a guy that was pretty much pure speed and bend with a bit of a counter move from speed to inside to a guy that has pretty much every tool in the toolbox. I think that shows great work ethic. I think that considers him a top 10 pick for sure, especially in this draft. You want someone that's going to be working super hard and continue to transform his body and to be an absolute weapon off the edge. I think he's going to be a great DN1 for any team. And if it's a team like the Browns, that's just an unfair partnership. But either way, Abdul Carter tape last year, this year is just absolutely transcendent. And I think he deserves to be a top 10 pick easy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, his ceiling is top 5, right? Like, that's really like 4, 3,
2,
really.
I mean, the Browns sitting at 2. I struggle. You guys should go check out my mock draft that's out by the time this video and podcast is also out. I struggle to see how the Browns pass this kid up because they desperately need an edge too. I know they need a quarterback, but in this class, like pairing Abdul Carter with Myles Garrett, like Randy said, it's kind of not fair. Like that's one of those moves where you're like, okay, this team is ready to compete because you can't block them, and they already have a really good secondary. So I struggle to see how even the Browns at 2 pass them up, honestly.
It'll be a good matchup this week when he's playing. If he gets out there, I know he's a little banged up right now, but it seems like he's ready to go. So if he gets out there against Notre Dame, and he's kind of come on strong from a pass rushing perspective. A few games this year, like down the stretch, Maryland was 90.8. SMU, Oregon was pretty good there. Definitely has the hurries. I think the thing with Abdul, like, yeah, he had 12 sacks too. Man, the hurries, like he gets after those guys and disrupts in that backfield. Like that's the thing when you watch Penn State and why they're so devastated on the defensive side is because Abdul just comes after it. And I think that he sets the tone there, similar to what Parsons probably would do if they, like Randy talked about, if they would have kind of unleashed Parsons the way they unleashed Carter there. I do agree there. Now we got to pick because this is the fun part. This is where we get yelled at in the comments below if you're on YouTube. But Randy, who you leaning here? Are you taking Carter or Parsons?
I'll let Christian do the other one. I'll pick Parsons because I think there was a bit. I know me and Christian argued in that draft class about Parsons' ability to actually play linebacker itself. I think he was a well above average linebacker that had the upside to be, a phenomenal blitzing A-gap guy and obviously across the edge. I think we saw a bit more of the back and forth, so I'm going to take him. Obviously, it's a bit biased with what we see in the NFL already, but I love the work ethic. I think these guys are so similar. It's crazy, though.
That's the main thing. When Micah was just a linebacker, I had problems with his processing ability and even his coverage ability. Like I thought he could get flat-footed, and it was because he wasn't seeing things. But it turns out when you play edge rusher, you don't have to do that all that much. So it just didn't matter. They moved him, but I'll take Abdul because the more I watch Abdul Carter, the more he locks into a top 5 player in this class for me. And I mean, honestly, I don't even think he's reached his height. And I've watched all the film. It's just every time I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is a 10 plus sack guy. I'd bet he gets 10 sacks every single year at this point. And that's pretty, I mean, I don't say that about many edge rushers. I'll put it that way.
No, you don't say that about many guys out there.
No, I don't. Normally I say like, oh, I think this guy can be, but like I feel probably overly confident that Abdul Carter is going to be like a 10 to 15 sack guy.
Yeah. I mean, Micah
say too much, and I'm learning that.
Unfortunately, you do. But I also think Micah is a bit better run defender right now, so that's also a little bit of a obviously many years in the NFL now, but I want to see that a lot more from Abdul Carter. He's just not asked to do it with obviously Dennis Sutton on the other side and the D tackles covering that side of the ball.
Yeah, he'd be a good fit really anywhere in the top 5. I'm going to lean Parsons just because I have to. I'm a Cowboys fan. No, I think Parsons. If he was going to be unloaded the way Abdul could, I think he would have put up the numbers too. I think from just a prospect perspective, the athleticism is there, and it'll be interesting to see who's the better athlete. I'm interested to see like what the combine goes down.
Yeah, but also, is Abdul Carter hazing anyone? Because that should go into the eval too,
Hey, at my prospect, hey, if you play like Parsons, a little hazing, I'm okay with it. Like you get away with a little hazing here. Like no assault. Let's stay with it.
Just surprised you're allowed to take pictures in that locker room. Just saying.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's move on before we get canceled. So next group we're gonna go here.
Please,
Mykel Williams from Georgia. And Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. Now, Mykel Williams this year, 6'3", 252. His 2024 stats, defensive grade is 70.6. Pass rush productivity, 6.8. Win percentage is 11.0. Sacks at 5. Pressures at 26. And Tyree, he beat him in every category here when he came out in 2022. So, he's 6'6", 275, 50 pressures, 8 sacks that year. 33.7 win percentage, 18.5 pass rush productivity, and in 75.1 defensive grade. And so when Tyree came out, I mean, he was a freak of nature. I mean, people were talking about him being just an ultimate freak, but raw, right? We heard that a lot. It was like the raw thing. Hey, he's an athlete. He has that there. And when you're looking at it too, he had 32 hurries that year in 2022. So definitely has it. I think these two guys are interesting because when we think of Mykel Williams, we think of raw. We think of athlete. We think of like the same things we think with Tyree there. Tyree also had more production though when you're looking at it. But I think this is a hard one. This is a hard one because he checks all the boxes from that metrics that we're using here. But from like a film base and like impact base, I really think Mykel could be that guy there. Where are you at with these two, Christian?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that stands out about these two and why we pick them as well is the length is a major factor in how they win. Now, I think part of Mykel's evaluation includes what Tyree has kind of failed to do at the NFL level, which would be develop. Really, like Tyree was winning almost purely on length, and there was talks like I discussed maybe bumping him to the inside because I think you can utilize that length. He was strong enough. Mykel has a lot of the same traits, and I think part of this year, this has been an injury-ridden year for Mykel. He got banged up in that first game against Clemson, and even when he's been playing, he gets hurt and has to come out of the game for a little bit. So I don't think we've seen the best from Mykel, but I do think it's important to realize how high people were on Tyree Wilson that year. I mean, that year, Tyree Wilson went before Bijan Robinson, Jalen Carter, Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, there's a Christian Gonzalez. Like, I know it's the Raiders and they do those things where they take a worse player, but even in our estimation, like that was a reasonable kind of range for him to go in that top 10. So I think when you start to compare the two prospects and you start to look at exactly what it is, I think Tyree was a little bit older when he came out than what Mykel will be. And Mykel actually just did declare yesterday, so he will be in this draft. I think Mykel probably will wind up with a better grade. I'm trying to look it up. 81. No, I take it back. They're really close, and so I think that speaks to this. But I've got Mykel at 79 and change, and I had Tyree at 81 overall. So a pretty good comparison to the point that I don't know if Mykel is going to be that top 10 pick, though. I think that's the difference here.
Yeah, and I think Tyree, we had so much versatility baked into those grades, and yeah, I mean, he's got injured before his first season, so lost a lot of the development early. He's still trying to get back into that. I think we saw some flashes this year. I think the Raiders really don't have another edge rusher to properly be able to kick him inside on third downs and obvious passing downs to really utilize the full strength of what we thought he could be. But all the tools are kind of there. It's just, again, like you said, the lack of development so far with the actual toolbox and getting to the passer, besides just using your strength and length to get there. Mykel, at least we've seen a couple different ways he can win at this level. And I think he's a bit faster. I think he's a little bit better of an athlete. And I do think he's going to be more of a pure edge at the next level. I think that's going to be a major difference between the two. But again, we saw Tyree against inferior competition, if we're going to be honest, between these two, really kind of dominate and really set an edge for the team and really capitalize and be an anchor for them. And Mykel kind of did that, but it's the Georgia team. They use a lot. They rotate a lot. Tyree, I think, just in their last seasons, played almost 150 more snaps than Mykel did this year. Again, injury-ridden, so I think the stats would be a bit better. It's just a little bit, 150 less snaps, 3 less sacks. Pressure-wise, they counted a lot of the interior pressures as well, getting close. I think this is a lot closer than people would like to think. But Mykel has a lot to grow, and I do think he's going to go early. I think he's going to go at least top 15, and that's just kind of how it is. I think it's a lot of traits and hoping he can get to that next level, but we still need to see a lot more.
Hey, Mykel's going to be 20 when he gets drafted. That's how young that kid is. Like that,
Mhm.
that is impressive. I mean, he has less than 1,200 snaps too when you're looking at it. So like, I think that's the big. I think you brought up the injury stuff with him. I think that's really why he hasn't been as consistent as he needed to be. Like he just hasn't had that consistency that we've needed to see from him, season in, season out. Because of that, I mean, obviously the ankle and then the foot surgery in the spring. So like, those are the things you have to look at. But yeah, I mean, I'll pick first on this one. I'm taking Mykel Williams. I just think I know the metrics we use here, the green checks that we have here on YouTube, kind of all lean Tyree Wilson. But I just think of when you looking at him, his ability, like his length and separation, kind of like Christian talked about was his length, but his separation ability to kind of move at that size too. Like he's a big boy going down. He's really has surprising power. I really like Mykel. I think he's a game changer. And I think a top 15 pick's fine. Like he's probably going to, Tyree probably should have went top 10. So like, I think that Mykel probably should go in the range that maybe Tyree should have went. But I keep looking at like, when you're just looking at like, you know, the database, I know Christian wrote a mock and everything like just, I would love for him to get to, you know, when you're thinking of like the 49ers or someone there when we talk about edge guys, maybe going in there and kind of being that counterpart where he can kind of grow and learn from big guys like Bosa and those type of guys. So I'm going to lean Mykel Williams here just based on, I think from a just a talent and pure high potential standpoint, I'll go there. Christian, where are you leaning?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, the grades would say that I lean Tyree Wilson, and I think part of that is that accompanying eval that I wanted to use him as a 3 tech, or maybe not as a 4-3 edge, but rather a 3-4 defensive end, and then you can flip him to the outside linebacker position where he can, you know, use that length to really beat guys around the edge, or you can throw him with his hand in the dirt and he can push the pocket backwards. We haven't really seen that, and I think part of that is a scheme problem. So I'm still going to lean Tyree, but I do want to say, like, Mykel is going to, he will be drafted high. I think I'm a little concerned that the injury stuff is going to pop up though, and so then we might start to see a fall of sorts where it's like teams aren't really comfortable with how often he's been injured. That said, I just think Tyree Wilson was 23 years old when he got drafted. And like you said, Mykel is going to be 20. So there's a big difference there. I think teams are going to weigh that. So I lean Tyree, but once again, very, very close here.
Yeah, I'm also going to lean Tyree, unfortunately, mainly because of the versatility. Like you said, it's more of what I like. And I like the power and length with a lot of quick step inside as well. I think Tyree Wilson, with a bit more development here, can really make a huge impact, especially on the opposite side of really good edge rusher like Max Crosby and Micah. Like I said, there's just 20 years old for a reason, not enough snaps yet, the injury history. I think there's just a couple checks that unfortunately puts him just below.
That's okay. You guys can be wrong. But I will.
I also want to know, you guys have both picked the player that plays on your favorite team. I think we did a bad choice or made a bad decision in picking these players. I didn't get to pick any Bears. I don't think that's very
They don't
fair,
have any.
You know?
They don't have any good young players.
I knew that joke was coming, and I set it up for you, so you're welcome.
Yeah.
They you know, they're a struggle bus out there. But I will say the one last point with Tyree, the one thing I will say is like he screams second contract on a different team, just killing it somewhere. Like just going somewhere, just crushing it, not on the Raiders. Like that's where the Tyree stuff goes. All right, let's go over to defensive tackle. We're talking Mason Graham, Michigan defensive tackle, versus Jalen Carter from Georgia. Mason Graham sitting at 6'3", 320, 90.7 defensive grade. Win percentage is 12.9. Miss percentage, when you're looking at that, is 2.6. He wins on that. Pressures, he has 33 from 2024. He wins on that one. And stops, he has 30. He wins on that one based on comparing them when they came out. In 2022, when you look at Jalen Carter, his defensive grade was 92.3. He won there. And a 15.5 win percentage. He wins there. As far as the other numbers, 32 pressures, 18 stops, 6'3", 314. Now, Jalen Carter, at the time of him in this draft, before he had that unfortunate, well, it was his dumbass for having the unfortunate thing, the race incident that one of his teammates died. You know, he was a number one pick. I mean, people were out there calling for him being that kind of disruptive out there. We've seen Mason Graham, you know, top 5. You know, I even argued on a pod when we did it recently that he could be the number one player in this draft. I mean, he has that kind of upside there. Randy, where are you two with these guys? When you look at these guys, is this good comparison here, trying to figure out which guy you'd rather have?
Yeah, I think it's good just simply because of what they were asked to do as well. They were obviously meat eaters in the middle of the field. They stopped the run pretty easily, but they were both really focused on third downs. They were really efficient and really kind of a focal point for both teams in the attack of the passer. So I really like the comparison. I think Mason Graham, I want to say he gives you a bit more on the passing downs. I think he also gives you more of a 3-down threat than Jalen Carter has so far. Again, the Eagles don't really ask him to do that. Georgia didn't really ask him to do that, where Michigan always has for Mason Graham. Yeah. And I do like the leadership qualities of Mason Graham a bit better as well. Unfortunately, for Jalen Carter, because they are so close and they're both so dominant and have showed pretty much everything we want to see on the field, it's going to be the intangibles that are going to carry Mason Graham just above, just because it's that razor thin for me. And I think, like you said, without all the off-field stuff, Jalen Carter would have been a top 5 pick. He probably could have been a Bear, whatever, just to go against Christian there. And I do think whoever gets Mason Graham this year is going to look, no matter what in a decade, as an absolute winner of the draft. And I will say, obviously, I think we say the same thing with the Eagles right now, Jalen Carter.
Yeah, let me tell you though, Jalen Carter was my top player in that class
Yeah,
he
over
was.
CJ Stroud. I mean, like that kid was. I had never seen defensive tackle film like that in our years of doing these evaluations, and so I think maybe part of that is like I got so excited when I look at these two grades between these two players. I have Jalen Carter kind of far and away ahead, and that was with me knocking him for the incident. So like. I considered him like a blue chip all pro type of player. And I think Mason Graham is also a blue chip type of player. I think he's got all pro upside. I have him as a Pro Bowl grade. He is one of my few first round grades as well. This is not to knock Mason Graham at all, because I think what we've seen from him too. I mean, even watching the Michigan defense last year, it's like Graham was popping up consistently. Like he has been dominant now for 2 years. And I think he should be a top 5 pick in this class. But in a year, if Jalen Carter were in this class where there's some uncertainty about the quarterbacks, there was no driving incident, I think Jalen Carter would be the top pick going to the Tennessee Titans. And I think Mason Graham might be the second pick or something like that, second or third, whatever. So to me, like the pass rush stuff, I think they both do it really well, but I feel like Carter just has more power behind his punch. I think Mason Graham is more effective at bending, wiggle, getting to the quarterback quicker. I think Carter just bullies people. So I'll give Graham the edge there. But this is these two players. I think they're going to end up 2 of my top defensive tackles ever graded. I think. You know how I feel about the next guy that we're going to talk about. So, I won't spoil the next one, but these are going to be at least top 5 in my all-time grades here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go Mason Graham as well. I lean with Randy. I think Randy picked Mason, right? You kind of said it, not said it. So, like, I think it's there for me. I love Jalen Carter coming out. I think you and me talked about it before we did a show for the show will not be named. I talked about how, hey, he's got to go 1. Then he got in trouble. And then, it's like, dang it. Okay. So, he's going to go down there. For me, Mason Graham, it's all about his football instincts. This kid's got it. Like, and he can you put him out there and he's just going to he's going to lead your team. Like, I think you can place him anywhere. I think Carter's been I think his immaturity is the reason why he struggles a little bit at the Eagles. I mean, he's still Jalen Carter. Like, he still has impact. We see it. But I just think Mason can do that. He's a great, pass rusher. I think he has that when you have 12 sacks there. And when you look at all the big games, think of like Alabama in the playoff last year in the Rose Bowl. You think of the games this year against Ohio State. The big games, dude, this kid steps up. Like, he makes that big tackle for loss. He does those things. He does not disappear. I think sometimes with these defensive tackles, sometimes you just see him disappear. You're like, hey, why did that kid not make an impact? Sometimes they make an impact not in the score sheet or the box score, but then some do both. And that's what I think separates these guys a little bit too. And I'll take Mason Graham, but they're both tremendous. They're both tremendous prospects there. And it's not really a bias thing for me. I just think Mason Graham's one of the best players in this draft class.
Yeah, it's totally fair. And I think for what it's worth, like the miss percentage that we have on the screen here, if you're watching on YouTube, like the 2.6 compared to 6.9 is significant. And part of Jalen Carter's struggle right now is that. And so if Mason Graham is able to offer, as good as or maybe even a little bit better than what Jalen Carter does as a pass rusher and is cleaning up the tackles on the interior, I think maybe Mason Graham does have a better career, but I'm still taking Jalen Carter because that kid he's a nice football player, man. These are 2 nice football players, though.
Yeah. All right, let's jump over to Christian's love child here. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, defensive tackle here, 6'3", 305, 2024 stats when you're looking at kind of what we're going through. PFF defensive grade this year, 86.7. Win percentage is 10.3. Miss percentage is 4.5. Pressures is 34, and then 26 stops. He had six sacks, 3 hits, 25 hurries this year, and 31 tackles. He did pretty good. He was a very, very solid for Ole Miss this year in terms of that. Just couldn't beat Kentucky. Come on, Lane. Then when you flip it around over here to Bryan Bresee, right? Bresee? Did I say that right? Yeah.
Bresee.
Bresee. Yeah, whatever. 29th pick in the 23 draft for Clemson. We really liked Bryan when he came out. I remember we were talking about, hey, wow, he's slipping. Why is he slipping so much? When you look at his 2020 U2 year when he came out as a prospect, 6 stops, 24 pressures, 21.4 miss percentage, 11.9 win percentage, and then a 73.5 defensive grade. So the only one that he won on here was the win percentage, but he's 6'5", 305, but he did make an impact. Like, that's why one of those things when you're thinking of Bryan, and we've seen it a little bit this year, right? In the last 2 years, the sacks that we've seen, over 10 sacks, on for his team in the Saints. Like, we've seen that ability there. Christian, where do you lean with these guys? I'm going to let you just talk about Walter Nolan because Randy jumped in after you, so we'll let you start it.
Yeah, and Randy gave me the flowers last week, I think, a little bit, but and all of what I say about Walter Nolan is not to discredit Bryan Bresee. I think that last year Bryan Bresee was dealing with some family stuff as well, and
he played 250 less snaps than Walter Nolan in these stats.
Yes, super important, but when he was on the field, it just wasn't as good as what we had seen, and really he never really hit his potential in college, I don't think. Whereas Walter Nolan's kind of the opposite, where it's like all we really needed was this kid to be engaged and entertained by the game of football. He wasn't always that at Texas A&M. He would just take some snaps off. And this year at Ole Miss, this has been a revelation, I think, for a lot of folks that this kid has talent. He was a top recruit for a reason, and we've seen the production now. When you stack these numbers up against Mason Graham, who we just talked about as a locked-in top 5 player, they are comparable, and they are very comparable. And so Walter Nolan, to me, I think most of what makes me so excited about him is the power behind his hands. He's not even the most refined player at his position at this point. I think there's still a ton of room to grow, but because he was able to just win with all of that power and tenacity and motor and stuff that we didn't always see at Texas A&M, it just gets me so excited. I mean, the explosiveness grade, I have a 9 out of 10. The pass rush grade, 8.5 out of 10. Strength, 9.5. Like, this kid to me is a super versatile piece that you can, what we just talked about, 4-3 versus like a 3-4. I think you can put Walter Nolan in any of those spots. I don't think he's a nose tackle. Don't get me wrong. At 305, I don't think he's playing nose, but there's a chance, like Byron Murphy last year, where he played nose at Texas because he was so powerful and so quick to get to the quarterback from that position. I think we could see something like that with Nolan, where he's pretty scheme versatile. He's going to get to the quarterback. And when he goes to wrap up running backs, I think he does a really good job. And especially when you compare him to Bryan Bresee here. So this one's easy for me. Walter Nolan is my DT1 this year over Mason Graham. I know that's a hot take. You can roast me in the comments. It'll help the algorithm, so go for it. But yeah, Walter Nolan's a stud. That I considered a first round pick on here. I don't even know if that's true. I just consider him a first round pick, and like I said, I made the graphics, so yeah, he's considered a first round pick now.
Well, he better be, or else some people are going to lose some jobs. Walter Nolan is just, at least I'll say Walter Nolan this year is so electric and truly has been game changer for Ole Miss that it's very hard to just not pick him here. Obviously, you see all the checks on the visual graphic of him just winning and everything. Again, there's a little bit of a caveat of Bryan Bresee not playing a full season, basically, in this kind of matchup here. But I do think Bresee gave you a bit more true versatility. I think there were some edge rushing snaps. I think you got some extra bits everywhere. I think he's truly a 3-4, 4-3 D tackle, can give you some outside rush, can be a true move piece for you. Walter Nolan, I think, can do that. We just haven't needed to see it because he's been so dominant from the inside. And like you said, Bresee never really truly, I think, got fully engaged like we saw from Nolan this year. I think we got, 2.5 years basically at Clemson of what we saw from Walter Nolan at Texas Tech to a bit of a better degree. And I think that's why this is almost an easy Nolan. But again, I understood why we were high on Bresee. Obviously, going in the first round was a no-brainer. Where he went, whatever. I do think we saw a bit more growth from him this year. We saw some good plays, and I think that's where this gets a little bit closer when you start to see a little bit more of a unlocked and true potential from him this year. But Walter Nolan is so disruptive and able to do so much in the middle. It just has to be him for me.
Yeah, no, we're clean sweep here. It's Walter Nolan. I think that if Bryan would have played more snaps, maybe the numbers would be a little bit different in terms of that. Maybe we're looking at the prospect wise, but I think Walter Nolan checked a lot of boxes this year. He did what he needed to do by going to Ole Miss, and he stepped up. And I think that he put himself in that first round category. Better than Mason Graham. We're gonna fight on another day about that as we go into it.
There'll be plenty of days.
But I will take Walter Nolan there. All right, let's jump over to cornerbacks. Let's get in this one. This one's gonna be fun. All right, so we're going over cornerbacks here. Travis Hunter versus Derek Stingley Jr. from LSU. Travis Hunter this year, so Heisman. We'll just put that off the bat. Heisman there. He wins all the boxes here, so this is why the conversation can be interesting. Listed at 6'1", 185. His defensive grade is 89.3. His coverage grade 90.7. His pass breakups is 7. Interceptions is 4.
Snaps per reception.
Thank you. Snaps per reception, 17.6. Going over to Derek Stingley, 0 interceptions his year in 2021. So this is 2020, excuse me. He was injured in 2021. 5 pass attempts, 15.7 snaps per reception, 71.7 coverage grade, 72.1 defensive grade. Both are very, very good prospects when they were coming out. Derek Stingley was the 3rd pick in the 2022 NFL draft. Travis Hunter's been all across the board here based on where the Titans are now, the 1st pick. Some have Hunter mocked there still. Some have him mocked 1, 2, 3, 4. I've seen him all there. Many were considering him the number 1 pick for a long time there because of the quarterback positions here. So when you're looking at these two guys as prospects, Randy, where are you at with these two?
Unfortunately, it's really not fair if you look as just a prospect because Travis Hunter does both ways, Heisman. So it kind of has to be him. If you're looking pure shut down left or right corner, I think freshman year Derek Stingley with a little bit of a disappointing next year in 2020, as we see the stats here. I think Stingley was much more of a pure lockdown corner, man zone, everything. I think we had a lot more technique, a lot more just natural football IQ, a lot more understanding of the offense and everything, trying to do all the little things. It was one of the best freshman seasons we've ever seen, if we're going to be honest, out there, at least in coverage wise. Obviously he's still not a great tackler or anything like that, but he's doing his best out there. I think stat wise, he's never going to match up to Hunter on defense simply because teams tested Travis Hunter. It was stupid, but they did it. And teams really didn't test really Stingley ever. He had good running mates with him, but I think if we're just putting one on an island in any defense and any coverage, at least at the college level, it's Derek Stingley for me. However, ball skills, the click and close, all the little things that make him so dynamic, Travis Hunter excels far above Stingley in those. And it's the technique versus the spectacular. And most of the time I'm a technique guy, unfortunately, for Travis Hunter here. So
yeah, this one to me is like, we don't talk a lot about it, but this is almost like 2 different positions. And I know it's not 2 different positions, but the way Stingley plays the corner position is so vastly different from how a team should be using Hunter. What you want for Travis Hunter is a heavy zone situation where he can have his eyes on the quarterback and use the best instincts I've ever seen from a football player. I'll put that out there. Like, I've never seen a player who knows exactly what's happening on every single play and is able to get hands on the football. I think that's the important thing. That said, Derek Stingley, like Randy said, in man coverage, I would take him probably like 97 out of 100 times against Travis Hunter. I think he's just a better technically sound he's an athletic kid for sure, but doesn't necessarily just rely on athleticism. He relies on all of the little things in man coverage, and that's why we've seen Derek Stingley have a really good NFL career thus far. I think he's going to make an all-pro team when the all-pro teams are out. Whether it's first or second, I don't know, but he has 5 interceptions this year and has been great in coverage. Last year, he was even better in coverage. But just from a pure prospect perspective, I'm taking Travis Hunter 100 times out of 100 as well because of Stingley's bad year in 2020 or 2020, then getting injured in 2021. There were still a lot of questions. So just virtually from a prospect perspective, holistically, I'm taking Travis Hunter. Unless Derek Stingley wants to play wide receiver for the Texans because they need one now. So maybe he can show us that and we think different of their NFL careers. But Travis Hunter is the better prospect.
I remember when they drafted Stingley, there was a little pushback when he went the top 3 there. I mean, a lot of people were kind of, what was this pick because of what we've seen, but they've kind of turned into like, hey, now they were right. I mean, he is definitely, like you said, all pro caliber player. Yeah, I'll take Hunter because what we've seen from Hunter there, but we don't have the time to get into it with Hunter yet. Like we'll get into it when we get the tape and we do those things. I think instinctively he's tremendous, and I think that from an athlete he's tremendous. But in coverage, there's sometimes where I don't know what it is. I think sometimes he uses that athleticism. He thinks he can get away with a little bit of stuff. He cheats a little bit more than he probably should. Like those are things that are gonna have to get stamped out at the next level. Like I think that he's gonna have to figure out, I can't do that. Now it always weighs into that whole thing with like playmaking too. Like he's gonna have that playmaking. He wants to go do those. He wants to get the interceptions, the touchdowns, those things too. So it's kind of that risk reward thing. And I think he could do it. I think he's a tremendous athlete. He does that there. I still lead Hunter there, but I think this is closer than people probably think.
Travis Hunter, if he played safety instead of corner, I think he might be my best prospect ever, like across all positions, just because those instincts would be so much more beneficial at safety. Some people have discussed maybe moving him to safety at the NFL level. We're playing him safety corner, playing him in the slot. So he's a good tackler too. That's the difference between him and Stingley too, is Hunter can tackle a little bit. So, but if you move him to safety, I think instinctually, I've never seen a kid like this ever in my life.
That's the comparison I'll give you. If you moved him to safety, he'd be a more athletic version of Kyle Hamilton.
Yeah.
And that's scary because Kyle Hamilton, tested wise, is not the best athlete. The football IQ and the actual pursuit angles and just actually knowing where to be is what makes up for that. But if you put somebody that has all that and wants to be the ball hawk and is that athletic, that is really scary. But yeah, I mean, like you said, pure prospect is Hunter. If it's in zone, I think it's Hunter. But if it's any coverage, any team, it's Stingley for me.
And if it's wide receiver, it's Hunter. So we'll just we'll lean there too.
If it's anything besides right cornerback in man coverage.
All right, let's jump over to the next one. Will Johnson versus Patrick Surtain. I think this is a fun one too. So Will Johnson from Michigan was injured this year. So this is 2023 stats, 6'1", 185. Now, when I say injured, I should use quotation marks. So PFF defensive grade in 2023, 78.9. Coverage grade, 78.5. Snap per reception, 17.9, 2 pass breakups, and 4 interceptions. So the one that he wins on is the interception mark there. Now, Patrick Surtain in 2020, he was a 9th pick in the 2021 draft, 1 interception. So, that's where he missed on, but 10 pass breakups, 25.0 snaps per reception, not 89.5 coverage grade from PFF, and 90.1 defensive grade there, and he's 6'2", 208. So when you think of the size difference, Surtain's can be a little bit bigger there. But Surtain was a amazing player. Surtain was my key cornerback 1 that year. I wanted him, in terms of my favorite team, obviously, to draft him. I thought he was special. When you're looking at just overall, he was a hell of an athlete. Will Johnson, his first 2 years looked really good as well for Michigan. I'm interested to see where these guys lean because I love when they talk cornerbacks because it's so funny how different they are. But Christian, where are you at with these two?
This is an interesting one because I think Johnson, probably the comparison would be better to Stingley in the sense that we didn't get a very good final season out of him. There wasn't an extra injured year in there, like there was with Stingley. Like we got a bad season and then an injured year. Whereas Johnson was phenomenal last year. But maybe the stats don't indicate that he was as phenomenal as Patrick Surtain in that final year.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one because I think the interceptions mark that he wins on, the reason is because Patrick Surtain didn't get the ball thrown at him. Like he was such a lockdown corner that year that no one wanted to throw him the ball. And so I think that's where it's like Johnson got a lot of those picks in zone coverage where he was reading the eyes of the quarterback as well. I think 2 or 3 of them. One of them I want to say was right on Marvin Harrison Jr. in 2023, if I remember correctly, definitely against Ohio State. So shout out Kevin for that. But to me, this one's still close because I think when you just look at technique and ability to be on an island, this is the player that I think of when I watch Will Johnson. That said, I do have Surtain graded slightly ahead, slightly. I think it's within like 2 points in this scale. I think Surtain he was my corner 2 that year. I was wrong, by the way. I had J.C. Horn as my 1, and that's how it went in the NFL draft. So the NFL agreed with me, but they were stupid, and I was stupid. But yeah, Surtain has been just one of those island type of corners. I think Johnson has that upside as well, and should go in the top 10, but I lean Surtain here.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said that Pat Surtain played so many more snaps than Will Johnson in a career in the same amount of seasons. I don't understand. It is insane how many snaps he played. So the target numbers and everything's going to be a little bit skewed that way, but that's why like percentile wise and everything, I would say, Pat Surtain had a worse passer rating against him than Will Johnson. So I think that's another bonus for Will Johnson and the totality of their careers. But there was just something so technically refined and just pure lockdown on the outside in man and zone with Pat Surtain for me that it's so tough for me to get Will Johnson there. I think if we had another full year and we saw everything from him again this year, it would be very, very close. And I think I'd probably lean Will Johnson because I think he's got a bit more ball hog in him. And I think he's the pass breakups and everything. I think when you're actually throwing to them, I'm going to go Will Johnson on that. But the pure coverage and everything, I have to go Pat Surtain. Like you said, obviously a little victory lap. I had Surtain over Horn, but there's a reason for that. I do think Surtain has always been able to do it without all the grabs. And I think we've seen a good amount of that from Johnson. Yeah. But people just don't throw over there. And like you said, a lot of his best plays are in zone. Because again, when they're in man, no one's throwing over there. So it's a hard comparison eval, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. But I would still pick Surtain right now, and it's because we've seen so many more snaps that it's a full eval going into the NFL as compared to Will Johnson, where there's still some projection.
Watching Will for as long as I had, there is not one player that I'm like, I'd rather have out there in a true passing down. I would have loved to see him go against Jeremiah Smith this year from Ohio State because there's not one guy that I'm like, I'd rather have him over Will Johnson. No, if you have Will Johnson back there, he's going to make something happen. He's going to make a play happen. He is a ball hawk. He's going to go get it. But he's just special. He's got good technique. He doesn't get overextended. He's a very, very smart defensive player. And yeah, like you guys said, if he would have played that full year, this is extreme close. I still think it's close just from a prospect perspective, like a ceiling potential. They're both good. As much as I think that he didn't play this full year this year. I'm still leaning Patrick Surtain. But I'll take Surtain as well, just because of numbers. I mean, you look at those numbers, they're and you see him in the NFL. Obviously, you have to think about that as well. But I think Will Johnson can be Patrick Surtain, though. Like, I think he has that upside there. He's a special player.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to safety. Last position here. This is fun. So we got Malaki Starks from Georgia, who, gosh, I liked you, Malaki. Like, Malaki was one of my guys, and he has not had a great down stretch of the season as Georgia got eliminated. Obviously, 6'1", 205. His 2024 stats, here's how they pan out against each other. Defensive grade is where Starks wins, 78.3. Coverage grade, 72.2. Snaps per receptions, 14.0. 2 pass breakups and 1 interception this year. and he's considered a first-round pick. He was getting mocked top 15 for a long time. That started to drop down now. Now we're starting to see in the 20s as well. Then we're going against Kyle Hamilton. And I don't know if you guys remember Kyle Hamilton from 2021, but he was pretty good. 14th pick in the 22 draft, but 3 interceptions, 3 pass breakups, 17.6 stat per receptions, 80.8 coverage grade, a 76.1 defensive grade. He's at 6'4", 220, so obviously a little bigger. But Kyle Hamilton did things on that field that were special, and not even the best athlete out there in the world, but he really just can think the game really well. Where I think Malaki gets him is from an athletic perspective. I think Malaki is athletic, but Hamilton's more consistent. Like Hamilton was a more impact player week in, week out as well. When you saw that for Notre Dame, he was really good for Notre Dame when he was there. Randy, where do you lean with these two guys?
It's unfortunate. Malaki Stark really has no chance against Kyle Hamilton for me, and that's really just saying the love affair of Kyle Hamilton for me this draft class. Just such a special player, a guy that should have been top 5 in terms of what I thought he could be at the next level and what I think has been proven, especially now with the transition back to free safety, which is where he should have always been. They moved him to strong safety simply because they thought, the athleticism wasn't fully there. And again, the second he's put back in his rightful position, it's shown he's a good enough athlete to make every play on the field. It's just a guy, and again, for what it's worth, 2024 stats to these 2021 stats, Kyle Hamilton only played 7 games. This is half the amount of snaps, and he dominated him in every category.
No, not 7. He played in the 7, but he only played 8 snaps in the 7th game.
Yes, in game 7,
yes, yeah. Like he didn't even come close to finishing. That was the game he got hurt, and then he shut it down after that. So
yeah, he was a much better coverage safety as well. 92 rating against versus I believe it's 25.9 rated against. A little bit more grabby. I'll give him that. Again, I think that speaks to the athleticism. I do think Malaki Starks is a bit better of a move piece. I think he can play the nickel. I think he has shown the outside a little bit, at least in a pinch. You could use him out there. And I think he could play both safeties. Where Kyle Hamilton, I think, can play everywhere. It's just so dominant in the one position. But Malaki Starks, the athleticism and everything we've seen up until this point, I think the reason it's not as close as it should be for me is because he did not have as good a year as he should have. I think the tape coming into this year, I was so excited. And the more I've watched of the tape this year, I'm like, okay, where's the development? And it just hasn't really been there fully for me. And Kyle Hamilton was gradually just getting better all throughout. He's still getting better, and he's a staple of a back end. It's the pure dominant safety of old versus a move piece, good safety.
Yeah, and that's a really important way to frame it, because if we do recall, Kyle Hamilton, what will be my highest graded safety, even emerging out of this class, not to spoil this pick here, but Malaki Starks isn't even my safety one at this point. But Kyle Hamilton went 14th overall. And so when people are projecting Malaki Starks in the top 10 or the top 12, like we were doing with Kyle Hamilton, and then he tested, and I think that dropped him out of the top 10, maybe. Malaki Starks might be the inverse, where, okay, he's dropped to the 20s, now he tested, he's an elite athlete, and so now he's moving back into the top 20. I just don't think they're the same caliber player. And if Kyle Hamilton lasts till 14, in what I would view is probably a better draft class, or maybe a worse draft class. 2022, that class sucked, actually.
Yeah,
that class was terrible. So Kyle Hamilton lasting until 14 in a bad draft class doesn't give me hope that Malaki Starks is going to be this crazy top 10 pick, or I've seen him as high as like 6 in some mock drafts. That said, still a good player. I think his best film is probably as a freshman, when no one kind of knew him outside of us psychos that know recruits really well, and he just went out there and he looked like he was supposed to be on the field every snap. And then it just, like Randy said, it just hasn't gotten a lot better this year, unfortunately. And I think some of the coverage stuff has been concerning. There have been times where he, like Travis Hunter, tries to cheat plays, and he puts himself in bad positions. And while he is athletic, he's not making up the same ground as Travis Hunter is. And so it really gets a little dicey. I've really I'm not soured on him, because I still think he's going to be a really good NFL player. But when you compare these two, Kyle Hamilton is far and away the better player, in my opinion.
He is. I was trying to get some love for my boy Malaki. I will say, when you think of Starks, a strong run defender, though, right? A guy that can come down the hill, speed, physicality. Like, I do think Starks has that for sure. I don't know what it was towards the stretch. I don't know if that defense, Georgia was a mess. They just didn't look like they were in flux a little bit. And it felt like Starks was just not playing within the defense. I don't know. It felt like he was trying to make too many plays, and he just wasn't doing that. But he is an athlete. He's an outstanding athlete with really good ball skills. I think that he has good ball skills as well. I know the interceptions weren't there. Hamilton was an elite prospect. These guys have talked about it enough. Like, where those guys are at. But maybe, when you think of Starks, you might not have him as we're going to talk about your safety one here in a second, but you might not have him as your safety one, which is totally okay. But maybe a team's going to get a hell of a discount maybe in the second round for Starks, though. Like, if someone comes up and gets him, and in the way that he does hit his ceiling, then you're excited about it. I'll lean Hamilton too, but I do think Starks, he could bounce back from maybe a lackluster 5, 6, 7 weeks that he's had here, find his role there, and then really kind of blossom on an NFL roster.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I will say I feel like a lot more teams had safety as a top 2 need in 2022 as compared to this class, to where it's like everyone's like, okay, if he's not going to the Colts, where do we fit him in? Kind of the same thing with Genty. It's like, where do we fit that first round running back kind of thing if it's not the team that's in desperate need? So I think that'll be a little bit working against him in draft position. But like you said, he is a better run defender, at least at this level.
Yeah. I also think the hope is that he's similar to Stingley, right? Like,
yes.
You had a really, really impressive come onto the scene type of freshman season, and then maybe didn't get better throughout your career, but then you get to the NFL and you're all pro level. That would be awesome. And I'm rooting for Malaki. I'm not here to just like discredit everything that he's done. I think he's a good player. I just think maybe mock drafters are getting a little too hyped about him to where it's overvaluing him in the eyes of public perception.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. All right, last one here. We're going to do a last this or that here for safety position. Xavier Watts, Notre Dame, 6'2", 3. Okay, cool down over there. If I had a spray bottle, I'd spray your ass. It's 2024 stats, 87.2 defensive grade, 89.0 coverage grade, snaps per reception, 26.5, 3 pass breakups, and 6 interceptions. Watts beats Xavier McKinney on every single one of those categories. So McKinney came out in 2019. He was 6'2", 201, 3 interceptions, 4 pass breaks, 11.1 snaps per reception, 87.0 coverage grade, and an 86.9 defensive grade there. When you're looking at these guys and these prospects, it's fun. Xavier Watts has put on some hell of film, and he is really one of their leaders for Notre Dame. The reason why Notre Dame's in the position that they're in is because of their defense. As we're talking about this, they have a chance to go to the college football playoff championship, and God, I hope they beat Ohio State. And Xavier Watts is a big part of that, thinking from that safety position there. But Christian, why do you like Xavier Watts so much? What do you notice about his film? I know you've mentioned him before. You talked about it in the last show, but what are you seeing from him?
The main thing is elite ball skills. This kid can play as a single high safety. He can play as a 2 deep safety. He can play cover 3 and then be one of the boundary type of corners if you need him to be, or rotate to the boundary. I think he's also versatile enough to come downhill and play in the box. And he's just one of those players that I watch him and I'm like, man, maybe he's not the best athlete in the world. That he's a smaller kid. I mean, 6'2", 200 is probably what he'll be at. Hopefully he gets up to like 205, 210. It's not the biggest safety in the world, similar to Xavier McKinney. But the ball skills are really what separate these two. When you look at career-wise, 13 interceptions for Xavier Watts to 5 interceptions for Xavier McKinney. McKinney got his hand on more as far as pass breakups go. So while the final year stats for McKinney didn't match up, he still he still had great ball skills. But the reason I think it's important to compare these two players is Xavier McKinney is one of the NFL's best safeties right now. What he's doing for the Packers this year, what he did for the Giants before that has been remarkable. And he was a really, really good prospect that I think I just didn't see as many instincts with McKinney. He was an instinctual player, but man, Watts is on a different level as far as I'm concerned. So neither of these guys are even close to Kyle Hamilton, like we just talked about, because Hamilton, I don't know if any safety is ever going to meet the levels of Kyle Hamilton, at least in my eyes. But Xavier Watts has really, really been impressive. And he's one of the main reasons this Notre Dame team is about to play for a national championship potentially. You know, they're right there in the semifinal, and Xavier Watts kind of carried that defense through some of the tougher times where like you need a big play. Xavier Watts is going to make it. The USC game comes to mind with that pick six. Like he is one of those guys where the intangibles come out too. McKinney was also that, so I'm not necessarily giving him an advantage, but I love Xavier Watts, man. I think he should be the first safety off the board this year.
It's very close for me. I do think Notre Dame does a good job of scheming up and working with their safeties and, you know, getting the best out of them and teaching them and asking them to work with their strengths. Watts is definitely more versatile to me. I think he's a better pure cover guy. The ball skills, I think, is very, very close. Again, I think, you know, stat-wise, Watts gets you there a little bit of more with the picks and everything, but there was a lot of with McKinney. He got a pass breakup, but he almost got the pick. You know, so I do think it's closer than stats really will give you, but there's just so much that Watts does on the field, and the only thing when I was kind of breaking down the differences, it was pretty much McKinney was a better blitzer, but Watts is a better run defender. And then the coverage is really close. Either way, you can kind of pick your poison of what type of safety and what you're looking for. But like you said, they're both just absolute game changers in the back end. I think they should go in the same type of range here. Obviously, McKinney, a guy that could have won the first, went very early in the seconds. I think Watts should as well. I think him and Starks are closer than a lot of people will think. I know, obviously, Christian has Watts ahead of him by a decent amount, I would assume. But, you know, the general community isn't going to be there yet. But, you know, testing-wise, I'm hoping Watts really steps up more than I think he's going to. I think we're going to have some of the same thing where he doesn't test fully up to what we're going to get from Starks, and he's going to drop further down into, like, the 50s. And that's going to be an absolute steal. I think both of these safeties will be an impact player for teams. But I personally, from what I think the grades are going to be, would be McKinney.
Okay. All right.
We're beefing
there.
Again, in a month and a half, it could be, oh yeah, he did beat him by a couple points. It's Watts, but
yeah, it's close. I mean, when it's that close, it's tough, you know.
Exactly.
It's only January.
Yeah. Plus, he's wearing that gold helmet. He can't compare to Hamilton. He loses points there.
Thank God it's January. I was getting tired of talking about the things I was talking about in December. But yeah, I would probably go Xavier Watts too. I think I'd lean Xavier Watts in terms of just because that ball hawking, like you talked about here. And he's special. I think that he's a lot of fun to watch. It'll be interesting to see who's at safety one in terms of draft, what the draft board is on there. McKinney's fine, but I think Watts has just been put in a great year this year, and I think that you have to kind of acknowledge that too. Now, before we get out of here, I'm gonna put these guys on the spot. I did not tell him I was gonna ask them this question, but I think it'll be fun. Christian, of all the players on this board, so we just talked about, I don't know, I don't do math. I think we talked about whatever. Eight
players.
Well, we talked about more than 8, right? 16
times 2.
Oh, 16 players. So there we go.
I also don't know.
God, this is a sports and rec master's degree, boys and girls, right there. Like I hate to break it to you. If you had to pick the best prospect of all of these guys, who would you pick?
Wow, what a question. Jalen Carter comes to mind. Jalen Carter's raw film. I think if you consider and raw grade, I think if you consider the concern that I did have leading into that draft, I would then pivot to Kyle Hamilton.
Okay. All right, Randy, who would you go?
I think it's Hamilton. It's going to be very, very close with Mason Graham. I know Carter was up there as well, and I think Abdul Carter is going to get close as well. I know, unfortunately, we had to knock down Kyle Hamilton a couple points more than he would have been if he would have tested better. So I think that's why I'll stick with him. But I think in actual numbers on our grading scale, it's going to be like, I have a feeling it's going to be a point or a half a point with Mason Graham. So I just want to point that out. But it has to be Hamilton for me.
All right.
Just buying points with Kevin here, picking
I thought that
Mason
was
Graham.
fun.
Eh?
I know. I was gonna pick Mason Graham too, so we'll stick with Mason Graham. We're Mason Graham buddies this draft cycle, Randy. We finally found someone we can like together. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fun. I think that's an interesting question there. So that's it. Thanks for tuning in to the Quarters Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this or that breakdown. We had a lot of fun with this. Let us know in the comments down below if you're watching on YouTube. Like, hey, who do you like between all of these matchups? Just drop a list, or even just tell us at the end, like I just asked, who's your favorite one out of all these guys? We'd love to kind of talk, discuss it with you, kind of go through it there. But hey, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review if you're on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Let us know your picks. We'll catch you guys next time.